Here in New York City, officials say of the tens of thousands of retail thefts a year, 30% are committed by just 327 criminals. The NYPD says it's that group of criminals arrested and rearrested 6,000 times.
So over the last year, shoplifting has closed down stores all across the city. We're talking drugstores, chain stores, even an entire shopping mall. And since nothing seems to be getting done to stop any of this, these closures are likely permanent, changing New York City forever.
This is not a scene from one of those all-you-can-grab game shows. Cops say these are thieves who broke into a supermarket and walked out with shopping carts packed with items.
Some stores are locking up everything from coffee to frozen food to try to combat theft.
Shoplifting in the city is at its highest levels, with complaints up by nearly 18,000.
People could come in, they just don't care. The police come, they get arrested, they're let out.
Frozen food locked behind plexiglass, along with lotion and nail polish.
We have these professional criminals that walk into our stores and they are just brazen.
It's a story people are witnessing, even able to capture it openly on their cell phones.
Retail theft is not just impacting the retailers themselves. It has a trickle-down effect that will impact the consumers. Store closures, increased pricing.
So in order to stay open and keep products on the shelf, stores are now becoming as inconvenient as humanly possible. But not only will that do absolutely nothing to deter determined thieves, nobody's talking about the real problem here in New York, which is that if you steal under $1,000 worth of stuff, you're probably not going to go to jail. It's just a misdemeanor. And since the laws we have here don't punish criminals, this is going to cost all of us dearly. Not just in wasted time waiting for people to unlock the progressive plexiglass so that we can get our deodorant, but also since increased security and increased staffing isn't free. That money's got to come from somewhere, and it gets rolled right back into the products we buy every day. Stores that don't play this game end up shutting down. Those that manage to stay open now have prices that are so high, struggling New Yorkers can barely afford to buy the things they need to survive. And this cycle just continues over and over again. As stores shut down, the survivors continue ramping up security, and things cost more and more and more. And nobody's talking about how rampant crime isn't just changing the face of the city, the way it looks, it's also changing who can live here, because now it's too expensive for most people. Because even grocery stores have to raise their prices to compete with criminals. On top of that, stolen merchandise in New York State is sold to the tune of $4.4 billion worth of economic activity every year. In fact, in certain parts of town, things are so out of hand, criminals will literally rob a store and then set up a blanket with all the stolen merchandise on it right outside the store they just stole from. And to top it all off, most New Yorkers have no idea that all of this crime is the reason living costs are going through the roof, and that every time something gets stolen, they're the ones paying for it. So, as you can probably see, as theft increases, the in-store shopping experience for the law-abiding becomes less convenient, and that's happening here in New York to a greater degree than in most places. In fact, you'll notice that in this particular store, everything of value is locked up, even the ice cream. And whereas stores were once trending towards making things more convenient for people, now that trend is headed in the opposite direction, and the reason for that might surprise you.
Everything from lotion to cold medicine, beauty products, all under lock and key. This Walgreens store actually chained up its ice cream freezers because employees told us shoplifters were clearing them out on a regular basis. And if you want to buy anything...
So here's where we have our first disconnect between the consequences of crime and what most people think those consequences should look like. When most people think of the consequences of crime, they think of graffiti, broken windows, closed storefronts. But what they don't seem to think of is that anything costs more than 2 cents to make is behind plastic, and you don't have access to it without a store employee. That's part of the reason a thermos now costs $27. And all of this plastic, not only does it waste the customer's time waiting for a store employee, that employee is doing laps around the entire store trying to help everybody. But the real reason this is an issue is because every item in the store, not just those that are locked up, now costs more money so that the store can maintain itself, pay its employees, stay open, not shut down. On top of that, when most of us see a dilapidated, destroyed storefront, we look at that and we say, okay, that's because of criminal activity. But when this costs 2 to 3 times what it probably should, and it makes all of our lives more expensive, we fail to make the connection that crime is hurting all of us, even if it doesn't appear that way. But since this state won't punish criminals, when most of us walk into a store like this, we think the experience sucks because the company is greedy. And although greed is the reason prices here are higher than most people would like, most of us don't understand that the greed we're talking about here is the greed of criminals who would rather steal things than pay for them. Which is why in-store shopping is just going to continue trending in the wrong direction unless somebody somewhere decides to do something about it.
You're greeted by gates designed to deter shoplifting. Empty checkout aisles also have gates. A security guard told me the store recently added more guards to deal with thieves. And Safeway completely removed its self-checkout.
So California, New York, these are your shoplifting capitals. And even in this store, the self-checkout is weirdly inaccessible. You can't get to it and use it. And now stores are starting to realize that added convenience just enables criminals to steal things even faster than they had in the past. And although drugstores like this Walgreens double down on the plastic that protects all their products, along with individual little padlocks for every single row of products, stores like Lot Less are hiring security guards. And certain grocery stores will even install security booths with a guard by the entrance. And look at all this plastic. How could a small business ever compete with this? You know how much work it takes to unlock all of these and even sell these items? And in a way, shoplifting is actually helping these big chains put their smaller competitors out of business. How awful is that? Either way, the consequences of crime are real. They're all around us. Stores go from being 20% locked up to 30% locked up to 50% locked up like this place. And to offset the costs associated with that, they hire less people, which is why so many registers are empty. And if you've ever been frustrated by the lack of available checkouts in a store like this, now you know why that's happening more and more. Because a store that's losing money has to choose between security guards and cashiers. They can't have both because at some point their products will be so expensive they're just unaffordable and they have to shut down anyways.
Seemed like I said, two guys stuffing packages of chicken into their backpacks.
He remembers when he had to scan his receipt to exit the self-checkout area.
Well, I thought maybe that would stop some of the pilferage, and I'd see people come with stuff.
So even with all of this extra tech, criminals are still figuring out ways to steal whatever they want and get around the security that's in place, particularly because not everything can be locked up. Or in other cases, some items just aren't worth it to lock up. They just jack up the price so high barely anybody buys it. And what many people don't realize is that by paying twice as much for the same stuff that they used to buy, what they're doing is they are effectively subsidizing the cost of the criminals who get to shop at the same stores for free. Because if half the products on the shelf get stolen, the other half has to cost 100% more to even out the losses. And what that proves is that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this city because the law-abiding are buying that free lunch. But what's fascinating about this is that the one thing that the big chains thought was going to help them get an edge over rising costs is actually doing the opposite, and it's going away forever. So here we are in Target, one of the stores that has recently changed its self-checkout policy, where you're now looking at 10 items or under. But even though many retailers attribute self-checkout to rising crime, there's a reason a store like Target can't get rid of all of them, even if it would want to. And it's not for the reason most people think.
Target now limiting purchases to 10 items or less in self-checkout. The new policy already in effect at most stores nationwide. Why? Target says its pilot tests found the restriction made self-checkout twice as fast and improved the customer experience. It comes as the do-it-yourself.
So self-checkouts, some people love them, some people hate them. They're perfect for a pre-packaged item like this that might have a barcode or something on it. But if something doesn't come in a package and you have to scan it in yourself and type in an item code, these things fall apart pretty quickly. But Target's got studies showing that limiting self-checkout can help them do a few things these stores have to do to survive. And according to Target, their tests limiting self-checkout to 10 items or less has actually improved the customer experience by speeding things up, probably because most folks using the self-checkout are in a rush already. In fact, this particular store, a very busy area of town, it's 75% self-checkout registers. But the same studies that show self-checkout improves the customer service experience actually show something else.
According to multiple retail analysts, self-checkout machines increase the risk of theft and in some cases outweigh the investments companies made in them. At Walmart,
So there's a lot here, and it's all terrible for the idea of letting people check out their own items in today's landscape. First of all, if you have to lock up your products on the shelf, it should be obvious that letting people check those same items out unattended is probably a mistake. But look at how ridiculous this is. Apparently 1/3 of Generation Z admits to stealing when using the self-checkouts just because they can. Because it makes it look like you're buying things when in actuality you're walking out of the store with half of the stuff being paid for and the other half in the bag as well. But just like Target has the scale to absorb all of this security on $35 items, self-checkouts were also supposed to give them an advantage over the little guy, but that has totally backfired.
Dollar General is removing self-checkout machines from hundreds of its stores, in part to reduce shoplifting. And Costco has started screening membership cards in its self-checkout lanes after noticing more cases of card sharing.
And this also has a lot to do with greed. I mean, New York City already has some of the highest living costs in the country, and it's got some of the highest hourly wage costs for employees at any store, not just Target, not just a local retailer. And the whole idea of an automated shopping experience was supposed to cut down on labor costs in a way that a smaller retailer could never compete with, because labor is now so much more expensive that in the long run for a store like Target, it's actually much, much cheaper to install self-checkouts even with their high setup cost, because the hope was that as minimum wage increases kept on happening, the self-checkouts would end up paying for themselves, because not only are the machines very expensive, they're giant. They need to be in a big store. A lot of small stores, they can't do that because they don't have the space. But this has completely backfired on these big chains, because now they're paying the higher labor costs to an extent that might even be greater than a small business in a small confined space. And now they're in a position where all those cashiers they got rid of are now being rehired as security guards. But there's another angle to all of this retail crime that's making New Yorkers' lives even tougher than they need to be. It's the thing that squeezes us the most, and we don't even realize that it's happening. So at the base of this massive building, we have a whole bunch of empty storefronts, indicating that there's some massive problem going on in New York because it's a very busy area. But the real problem is that above those storefronts, you have apartments, and those apartments are 100% occupied. And that's not only a problem here at this particular building, but it's a problem experienced by many buildings just like it all over the city right now, because many residential buildings have ground floor units that are zoned exclusively as commercial. And you gotta think of the landlord of a building like this like a drugstore. If they've got a whole bunch of products on the shelf, some sell, some are stolen, they are losing a lot of money here, how do they get the rest of that money back? Well, unfortunately for New Yorkers, the answer to that one is not very reassuring. Because in order to get back the money for the stores downstairs that won't open in a high crime environment, the apartments, which are inside this nice entrance here with a doorman, have to cost a lot more money. In fact, right now in this building, the cheapest place you can rent is a $3,800 one-room studio apartment, and it's not available for another 30 days. Everything's occupied in here. And in New York, it's so crazy. We keep hearing about how landlords are greedy and how they charge too much and how we just need to punish them and regulate their rents so that they never charge anybody too much money, more than they can afford. But why aren't we blaming the criminals who are robbing this CVS right here for when it shuts down? Because once it shuts down, the apartments upstairs have to cost more to cover the losses. The landlord has to pay the same taxes. He's got to pay the same utilities for the whole building. I'm not saying landlords in New York aren't profit-driven, but you've got to understand the profit-driven criminals, they're the reason costs are higher than they should be. Now, is retail theft solely responsible for the high cost of living here? Well, no, not 100%. The city has also failed miserably in its job of allowing construction of new apartments, which is why you don't have enough places for the people that want to live here to live here. However, when you add to that the prevalence of unrelenting rampant crime, you accelerate what is already an untenable situation nobody is able to afford. And as the city's mismanagement forces landlords to shift their income from storefronts to apartments, all of us, even if we don't live in a building that has storefronts downstairs, our landlord might own buildings that have storefronts in them or might own storefronts elsewhere. We're all suffering because of retail crime.
We know the cost of living in New York City has skyrocketed. Pay hikes are not keeping up with inflation. A new study out today says the true cost of living has gotten so high, half of the families in the 5 boroughs do not have enough income to make ends meet. They need some kind of assistance. Here's Eyewitness.
So every single person that lives in the city knows it's way too expensive, but since none of us live in a store like this, which has been shut down or is in danger of shutting down, we think life goes on and we're not paying a price, but we are. And when you hear the real reason why New York has so many empty storefronts, it is going to make your head spin, because most of these crimes that we're seeing that shut down businesses, these are crimes being committed by a relatively small, repetitive group of people.
Here in New York City, officials say of the tens of thousands of retail thefts a year, 30% are committed by just 327 criminals.
So I think that the question most people asking this want to know the answer to, if it's just a handful of people, why don't we arrest them? Get rid of them. The city could totally end this problem in 5 seconds if they wanted to. But the reason they won't, and the reason we're going to keep seeing empty store after empty store after empty store, is because some of the people in charge in New York believe that those folks robbing 7-Eleven, they're actually victims. Life was unfair to them in some manner at some point in time, and that gives them the right to steal from people. We need need to find the root cause of what they're doing wrong. Ignore the criminal, look for the root cause instead. Maybe we'll find it somewhere. This is the type of thinking that is leading to a small group of people wreaking this type of economic havoc on all of us. And since no one has any real consequence or punishment for shoplifting, there's no system in place to stop first offenders from becoming repeat offenders. And what that means is the number of people committing crimes that go unpunished is only going to go up because nothing happens to anyone who does it. And sadly, what we're looking at here are the results of a recipe for the growth of crime. Crime diversion? We don't have any kind of plan to do that in New York. Instead, the current plan remains to charge forward, making the world a better place with a system of laws that doesn't actually punish anyone when they commit a crime. After all, stealing here is only a misdemeanor provided the amount of theft is under $1,000. On top of that, we've got judges who, when they see a criminal, don't see anyone who's done anything wrong, which is why so many folks that do commit crime end up getting released and are back out on the streets with the ability to do this again and again and again, closing down stores and shops all over town, even in once popular parts of town that had been thriving for years. What would your plan for crime diversion be? Are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing enough? Let me know. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.